Welcome to the splendid era of horror, where the pen turned fear into an art form, and shadows unraveled the secrets of the human heart. The 1900th century, the golden age of horror. Imagine a world where a scientist crafts a monster with his own hands, a poet drowns in the darkness of his mind, and a vampire sings a song of seduction in the silence of the night. This was the time when masters like Mary Shelley, Edgar Allan Poe, and Bram Stoker didn't just write stories. They reshaped our fears into new forms, tales that still live on the cinema screen today. Are you ready to dive into those pages and frames where every breath poses a question? Where does fear come from, outside or within us? The history of horror in film and literature, an extensive history. Horror is a genre that taps into humanity's primal fears, the unknown, the supernatural, the monstrous, and the darkness within ourselves. It has journeyed a long path from oral traditions to written literature and then to cinema, taking on new forms in each medium. In this history, we will see how literature laid the intellectual foundations of horror, how film gave it sensory power, with both evolving in tandem.
18th century. Gothic roots horror's literary journey begins with 18th century Gothic fiction. Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, 1764, is its first milestone, blending medieval settings, supernatural occurrences, and emotional intensity. It was rudimentary, but it laid the blueprint for atmosphere and the uncanny. Anne Radcliffe refined this tradition with The Mysteries of Udolpho, 1994, emphasizing psychological tension and sublime landscapes, which later became a mood-driven aspect of horror. A controversial gem of this era is Matthew Lewis's The Monk, 1996, the story of a corrupt monk, Ambrosio, filled with temptation, blasphemy, and violence. Its explicitness made it notorious, but it gave taboo topics a place in horror. The 2011 film The Monk captures its dark essence. 19th century, the golden age of literary horror. Published in 1828, Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, is not only a foundational text of horror, but also a philosophical meditation. At just 19 years old, Mary Shelley crafted a story that went far beyond a mere monster tale. Victor Frankenstein, an ambitious scientist, succumbs to his hubris and creates a creature, a being both grotesque and deeply human. This narrative explores the ethics of science, the consequences of creation, and the pain of isolation. The creature's tragedy lies in its rejection. It yearns for love but receives only hatred. Shelley's prose is vivid and emotional, leaving readers with a haunting question: who is the real monster, the creator or the created? This literary milestone took cinematic form in 1931 under James Whale's direction with the release of the Frankenstein film. Boris Karloff's portrayal of the creature, with its flat head, neck bolts, and lumbering gait, diverged visually from Shelley's text but retained the character's emotional core. The film's black and white film, aesthetic and dramatic lighting crafted a haunting atmosphere, establishing horror as a serious genre in early cinema. This adaptation translated the depth of literature into visual immediacy, remaining a touchstone of horror to this day. Edgar Allan Poe, the macabre maestro of the mind.
Edgar Allan Poe gave 19th century horror a new direction, shifting from external monsters to internal terror. His short stories and poems, The Telltale Heart, The Fall of the House of Usher, and The Raven, are masterpieces of madness, guilt, and the macabre. In The Telltale Heart, a murderer is tormented by the beating of his own heart, personifying his guilt. The Fall of the House of Usher presents a decaying mansion and its inhabitants is a Gothic nightmare, where the atmosphere itself is the source of terror. And The Raven, with a mourning lover and an ominous crow, is a poetic exploration of loss and despair. Poe's genius lay in his precision. He didn't leave fear abstract, but made it tangible and personal. His influence on cinema is profound. In the 60s, Roger Corman adapted Poe's works into low-budget yet atmospheric films like The Pit and the Pendulum, 1961, and The Mask of the Red Death, 1964, where Vincent Price's haunting presence brought Poe's vision to life. These films carried Poe's claustrophobic atmosphere, dread and psychological intensity to the screen, making horror accessible to a mass audience. Sheridan Le Fanu and Carmilla, the sensual vampire. Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla's 1972 is a work that gave the vampire trope a new direction, predating Bram Stoker's Dracula. This novella tells the story of Carmilla, a female vampire who forms an intimate and haunting relationship with her prey, a young woman. In Victorian society, sexuality was a suppressed topic, and Carmilla explores this repression through a supernatural lens, laced with lesbian undertones. Le Fanu's prose is dreamy and evocative, blending terror with beauty. Its cinematic impact emerged In the 20th century, when Hammer Horror produced The Vampire Lovers 1970, this film amplified Carmilla's erotic and gothic elements, with Ingrid Pitt as a seductive vampire. Hammer's lush visuals and bold storytelling transformed Victorian repression into a visceral experience, making the film a key part of the folk horror and vampire subgenres. Robert Louis Stevenson in Jekyll and Hyde. The Fear of Duality. Robert Louis Stevenson's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1886, dissects the dual nature of humanity, the internal conflict between good and evil. Dr. Jekyll, a respectable scientist, unleashes his dark side as Mr. Hyde, but this experiment spirals beyond his control. The story is not just horror, but also an allegory, reflecting Victorian hypocrisy and repressed desires. Stevenson's tight narrative and vivid imagery make it a timeless tale. In 1931, Ruben Mamoulian adapted Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde into a film starring Frederick March. The transformation scenes, powered by early special effects, were groundbreaking, and March's performance perfectly captured Jekyll's torment and Hyde's savagery. This adaptation turned literary introspection into physicality, setting a benchmark in horror cinema. Bram Stoker and Dr. Dracula. The century closed with Bram Stoker's Dr. Dracula, 1897, an epistolary novel that encapsulates Victorian anxieties in the form of a seductive, eternal vampire. Count Dr. Dracula symbolizes sexuality, foreignness, and decay, his charm and menace working in tandem. Stoker's narrative, told through letters, diaries, and newspaper clippings, creates a layered, immersive experience, taking readers from the foggy castles of Transylvania to the bustling streets of London. Dracula's cinematic journey began in 1922 with F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu, an unauthorized adaptation featuring Max Schreck's gaunt, rat-like Count as an alien nightmarish figure. Expressionistic shadows and eerie silence made it a haunting classic. Then in 1931, Todd Browning's Dracula introduced Bela Lugosi's suave and charismatic vampire, an image that remains definitive today. Both films highlighted different facets of Stoker's text, immortalizing vampire mythology and pop culture. Cinematic foundations. From literature to screen, these 19th century literary works were rich source material for cinema. As filmmaking technology developed, these stories found new life in a visual medium. The early adaptations of Frankenstein, Dracula, and Jekyll and Hyde demonstrated that horror wasn't just a literary genre, it could be a sensory experience. From the expressionism of silent films to the talkies of the 2030s, these works laid the foundations for horror cinema, which would expand into the universal monster era in the next century. The cultural context of the 19th century. This literary boom didn't occur in isolation. It was tied to a time when the Industrial Revolution sparked new fears, the misuse of science, urban alienation, Victorian morality bred repression and hypocrisy. Frankenstein tapped into scientific hubris, Dracula reflected fears of foreign invasion and sexual panic, and Jekyll and Hyde mirrored inner conflict. Poe and Le Fanu explored personal and psychological dread, inseparable from these societal shifts. Conclusion. The legacy of the Golden Age. The 1900th century was horror's golden age because it expanded the genre, from the supernatural to the psychological, from the personal to the societal. It was an era when writers turned fear into an art form, and their works provided a blueprint for cinema. Mary Shelley revealed the curse of creation, Poe illuminated the mind's darkness, Le Fanu infused sensuality, Stevenson exposed duality, and Stoker embodied eternal predation. Their creations not only revolutionized literature, but also inspired 21st century filmmakers. The next chapter will carry this legacy forward, as horror ventures into cosmic voids and pulp pages. Late 20th century, gore and global horror. In the 80s, Clive Barker's Books of Blood, 2084 to 2085, brought body horror and splatterpunk to the mainstream. Hellraiser, 1987, is its cinematic form. Thomas Harris's Red Dragon, 1981, and The Silence of the Lambs, 1988, gave literary depth to the serial killer trope, and the 1991 film The Silence of the Lambs made Hannibal Lecter an icon. Toni Morrison's Beloved, 1987, transforms historical trauma into the supernatural. The 1998 film captures its complexity. From Japan, Koji Suzuki's Ring, 1991, blends technological paranoia with a ghost story. Ringu and The Ring, 1992, were its global hits. 21st century, diversity and relevance. Today, horror is diverse and relevant. Victor LaValle's The Ballad of Black Tom, 2016, reimagines Lovecraft's racism from a black perspective. Silvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic, 2020, views colonial decay through a Gothic lens, and its film adaptation is awaited. Carmen Maria Machado's Her Body and Other Parties, 2017, takes feminist horror to new heights. In film, Jordan Peele's Get Out, 2017, blends racial satire with horror, reflecting the modern zeitgeist. Climate horror, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Dating, 2023, takes feminist horror to new heights. In film, Jordan Peele's Get Out, 2023, blends racial satire with horror,
lighting the modern zeitgeist to dating 2023 takes feminist horror new heights. Jordan Peele's Get Out 2027 blends racial satire with horror, reflected. Slaying Vampires in Digital Age fears Black Mirror and New Frontiers. Horror's impact and symbiosis. Horror is a mirror of social anxieties. Frankenstein shows industrial fears, Dracula Victorian repression, and Get Out racial tensions. Psychologically, it provides catharsis, bringing Freud's uncanny to life. Literature is its intellectual core, film its sensory power. The shower scene in Psycho, 1960, inspired by Robert Bloch, or The Exorcist, 1973, from William Peter Blatty's novel, are examples of this. Conclusion. Horror is an evolving genre that continues to reinvent itself, from Gothic castles to digital screens. It has grown through the symbiosis of literature and film, and as long as there is fear in humanity, horror will live on.